Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today we're going to learn about the mid to late 80s Gibson Melody Makers. The Gibson Melody Maker, they've been around since 1959, and a lot of people think that they just kind of went out of production after a few years, but the Melody Maker has pretty much been in production, ever since it started. I mean, there's a few small breaks here and there, but for the most part, you can find a Melody Maker from every era of Gibson. So let's go ahead and quickly go over them. So you've got the original ones from 1959 through 1961. Those are the original single cuts. They kind of look like a Les Paul, they just don't have the maple top to them. They're a thin slab body, and you've got a single coil pickup. The first year has a thicker one, and then they move into a thinner one. But then sometime in 1961 until 64, they switched over to this weird double cut shape. It's not necessarily my favorite, but I have reviewed a few of those as well, so if you want to check them out, you can. But then in 1965, they transformed it again. It's still a double cutaway shape, but it's more of like this freaky fish thing, as I call it. Joan Jett fell in love with those. I've fallen in love with those. Even though they're not the most expensive Melody Makers ever, they're some of my favorites because they have this really unique neck profile that starts off really slim and then it gets super fat towards the 12th. Those are great fun guitars to play, but they look a little bit goofy. But then from 67 to 70, they switch over to the SG shape. So we've still got the single coils, but those are some of the coolest looking ones because, it's just the SG shape. And they made them in many colors. You can find them in 1 pickup, 2 pickup, and 3 pickup variations. They're just kind of interesting. But after 1970, when those were discontinued, the Melody Maker name went away, but it was still here in spirit within the SG-1 and the SG-100 series, and a few other entry model guitars that were introduced at this time. But it wasn't until about 1974, 1975 when they brought the Melody Makers back. They reissued that 61 to 64 style. And they look like this. I've actually had those. They feel more so like a double cut Les Paul standard in my opinion. They feel like a higher grade guitar in the way that they're built. They're very solid. They feel super professional. They're not necessarily traditional Melody Makers in my eyes, based on the ones that I've owned. And you could find those all the way until 1982. Fun fact, the very last year actually got the full-sized headstock. Those are weird things. But then that's it for the Norland era Melody Makers. They didn't do the next iteration until 1986. And that's where this one comes in. So the Norland era ended after 1985, and here we are in 1986. This is the first thing that they're doing. You gotta keep in mind though, at this time, this is when the studio was first emerging in 1983. They went through a bunch of different iterations with that, so needing a Melody Maker was not as important. It's kind of interesting how this model has actually stayed relevant even into recent years. Then after these were done, they experimented with an XPL version of this exact guitar called the Flyer Pro. And ever since then, they've been doing a bunch of different Melody Maker style instruments like the All-American series, which then eventually went into the actual reissue of the 50s ones. Just kind of like a student budget model variation. As far as current production of the Melody Maker under the Gibson branding, we've had about a 4 or 5 year lull. I truly believe we will see Gibson bring these back within the next couple of years, because throughout history, there might have been other models taking the place of the Melody Maker, but the Melody Maker name has never disappeared for much more than about 5 or 6 years. In 2017, they tried with the M² series, Melody Maker. These were really inexpensive and cheap, but they got spanked in the review department. However, now that they have the new original and modern collection, a tried and true reissue that's actually good, around that $599 to $799 price point, of a single cut, a double cut, the fish shape, and the SG shape, especially that SG shape Melody Maker, I think it'd be a knockout of the park. It's just the next natural step for Gibson, in my opinion. So now that we're kind of caught up onto the speed of the history of the Melody Maker in different variations, this one was really trying to capture that original Gibson Melody Maker from '59. You're going to see this one is a single cut style, but you're going to notice some very key characteristics here that makes this different from the original. First off, those guys were slab mahogany bodies. This one's actually multi-pieced. Sometimes if you get it in the light just right, you can see it. But you'll notice things like there is no tenon cover that says Melody Maker. Their control layout is actually a little bit different. These are up and down, whereas the other ones were staggered. Instead of those strip style tuners, these have miniature Grovers. And ultimately, your plastics are a little bit different. But the three biggest things that are probably standing out at you is, hey, we've got an ABR-1 bridge with a stop bar tailpiece instead of the wraparound. So that means you can completely dial in your intonation with these. So if you're really particular about intonation, you might want to actually consider one of these because they're technically superior. But the biggest thing is, hey, we've got a humbucker right here. How cool is that? No more little dinky single coils. You don't have to modify a vintage guitar or buy a special pickup that's just meant to fit within that route. You've got a Gibson humbucker stock. But something that you're actually not going to be able to see is these have more of a 60s neck profile. It's not quite as full and rounded as those 59 Melody Makers. Not saying that those necks are huge, it's just this one reminds me more so of that 70s Melody Maker. Very flat feeling, but still rounded. So cool, you get a Melody Maker that's equipped for more modern music. How nice is that? But what is the origin story of these? Okay, so my best guess, based on all the ones that I've seen, is the first ones of these came out in mid-1986, and they will actually have that little custom shop edition decal on them. It'll be on the back of the headstock right here, and I find it funny. Sometimes I get people messaging me that they haven't. They're like, oh, I've got a big $6,000 custom shop edition Melody Maker. No, you don't. That decal simply means it was a limited edition run of some sort. A custom shop did not formally exist until 1993. They were made on the same production line as everything else. But that makes me think that they initially tried these as like maybe a music store ordered a small run, or Gibson was even trying a small run of these, and they proved to be successful enough that they later on went to do a run for another year or two. I believe you can find this style as late as about 1988, but I'm not 100% sure on that because you don't find too many of these on the used market at any given time. But they were pretty much the first formal reissue of the original Melody Maker body style. They didn't reissue those until about the 2000s. I don't think Gibson's actually officially reissued these in like a custom shop or anything, but that'd be kind of interesting, a true custom shop Melody Maker. I mean, they make the juniors and specials. Hey, why not, Gibson? Let's get on it. But as far as finishes on these, the only ones I've ever been able to see were red and black. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not other colors, but that's the only ones that I've seen show up. And pretty much every example of these that you will see have a rosewood fretboard. This one's kind of an oddball. It has an ebony fretboard, so that's a little bit interesting. So let's go ahead and throw this one on the workbench, take an individual look at its parts and specs, and then we will get to a playing demo. Inside the 86 Gibson Melody Maker, let's unfold its secrets, because these things have always had me curious as to what pickup is actually in here, because you see it sometimes that they're advertised as Tim Shaw's, and if that is in fact true, these things should be worth a lot more than what a lot of people sell them for. So let's go ahead and go in here. So first off, starting with our pickup, once again, it's different from the original 59 style because it actually has a humbucker ring. And you can see that this route is not actually connected to your control cavity. So this is just 100% completely different from the original 50 style. But what's kind of cool about this layout is it would be really easy to say, come over here, add a neck pickup, and then just do a little bit of routing that would all be hidden underneath this pick guard. And then I saw somebody once modify like a toggle switch right here, so it is kind of an interesting guitar to modify. Well, let's take a look at this pickup. It is not a Tim Shaw. What is it? I'm not really sure. In the mid to late 80s, there were a bunch of different pickups that would still have this patent number base plate, but you can tell it's not a Tim Shaw right away just by looking at the screws right here. They're not made of brass. So without tearing this thing apart, looking for like spacer colors and things like that, we can't really further identify it. But if I had to guess, it's probably part of like the PU 490 series, or just something that they had some leftover parts of. But it does have the braided shielding wiring, so I'm really curious to see what this ohms out at. So let's find out here. Is it hot? Or is it PAF in style? I'm going to guess it's going to be a little bit hotter. Well, I mean, it reads close to a Tim Shaw. Wait. What is going on? Okay, so it's somewhere around 7.8. So it's still PAF-like in style, but that is not a Tim Shaw pickup in there. So that's a little bit of a bummer, but it's still a nice pickup. I'm sure this would sell for about $200 all on its own. The pot codes are really hard to date on this thing. It almost looks like it's a late 83 code on this one though. So that puts it about error correct, but just master volume, master tone with your output jack on the front with one of those little ceramic disc capacitors. You've got your shielding right there. And here you can see this cavity. It looks like there's an A right there, and you can see through to the mahogany body right here. These things look really different just by the fact that they don't have that tenon cover right there. But you've got your speed knobs on this particular one, and hey, check it out, you actually have the historic thumb bleeders on it. And that's just a one-ply material. But now let's check out the bridge and tailpiece. I was a little bit sad when I took this off, but then I realized, it's kind of silly to think they would put a real Gibson ABR-1 on these things. Because those bridges can sell between $100 to $250 on the used market. But these are unbranded, which makes me think that they were probably made in Japan or something like that. Now, is it possible that it's been replaced? Yes, but I'm just thinking since this was kind of a student model beginner's instrument, that they probably just didn't use the high-end Schaller made stuff, as most of Gibson's stuff at this time was made by Schaller. But what is important for you to know is you do have a bridge tailpiece set up so you can do the intonation the way you like. It's easier for you to adjust the action height, so it is a very playable guitar in that aspect. What's kind of cool is these things have that really droopy horn right here. If you get the light just right, you can really see that. It looks slightly pointy there. Well, that's how the original 50s ones were too. You just gotta really look for that. But of course, being an ebony finish, you can see all the polishing scratches, picking marks, light nicks and dings. I mean, this was definitely a player's instrument, that's for sure. Somebody kind of indented this while they were setting it up or doing something, I'm not sure. So cool, now let's move on to the neck. Now what makes this one a little bit more special than all the other ones I've seen online is this has an ebony fretboard. And being an 86, it makes me curious if this was actually originally meant to be a Studio Customs fretboard. Because it's those same small mother-of-pearl dot inlays, except for it just doesn't have the binding of those. But you've got 22 frets, I'd say something around medium jumbos. We've got a nut width of 1.7 inches, which increases to 2.06 by the 12th. First fret neck depth, 0.82. That increases to 0.92 by the 12th. It's a nice and rounded feeling neck, but very thin. But here you can see they've got that tiny little headstock with the Gibson logo there. And you've got the standard truss rod in there. But notice these actually get legitimate truss rod covers. They're not just one ply. Which kind of makes you wonder, why did they do that there, but they didn't do like a multi-ply pickguard here? As far as the frets go, they're in pretty good shape. You definitely see some very, very light divoting marks on like the cowboy chord area, so like the first 5 frets or so. But after a nice polish job, I think these things are looking pretty nice. Just as some fun trivia here, it technically makes more sense on these Melody Maker headstocks to do the E strings the opposite way of normal, because then you get nearly perfect straight string pull on these things. But then you also have to remember that you have it the opposite way when you're tuning it. I just thought I'd point that out because normally it comes down at such an extreme angle for these E strings. I don't like it, so I just strung this one up like this. And moving on to the back here, there's not too much going on, but if you get it in the light just right, you can see a small seam line. It's right there, so that tells us it is at least a 2-piece mahogany body. I could not see any other seams. I would have thought it would have been worse than that, but hey, that's not too bad. But the originals were typically slab bodies. But what's kind of interesting about this is the neck heel right here. It comes to a triangle shape. I have never seen that on a Gibson before, but your strap buttons are in your usual locations. But we're well back within the mahogany neck era, so this is also a mahogany neck. But the tuners on these are mini Grovers. They're not the best. Like you can tell this one is actually sitting a little bit crooked, and it's simply because these don't actually hold them in place. When I was tightening the tuners up from the front, that's kind of what caused that one to skew a little bit. So they're better than the strip style tuners that they had back in the 50s. But if you're a stickler for things being straight, it's very common for these things to get askew. But take a look at the serial number, 8362, so that means it was made very late in December. So this is almost a 1987 model. But it's stamped into 1986. It was made in the Nashville plant number 24. And made in USA, but no custom shop edition decal on this one. And all said and done, it weighs 6 pounds, 15.7 ounces, so pretty much 7 ounces even. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds. Now that we know all about this Gibson Melody Maker, what are my final thoughts on this thing? I've got to say, this thing surprised me once I plugged it in. I ended up enjoying it more so than I did the original 59 that we just did a review on not too long ago. Now, some of that has to do with this is a lot less expensive. It's not a piece of history that tons and tons of people care about. It's just something that's made to be played, and that's exactly what this thing does. Having a humbucker definitely puts you into regular Gibson territory here instead of that single coil, but it really kind of starts to remind me of like those 65 Melody Makers, just in the way that they're so much fun to play. The neck profile, completely different. I mean, this is a really thin 60s neck, not necessarily my favorite due to the big shoulders that it's got, but sitting down, I actually enjoyed this neck. But the ultimate kicker for this one, I think, comes down to the ebony fretboard. I don't know why this one has it. Most of them that have shown up online have not had it, but this is that kind that I like. I love these little dot inlays when they're real mother of pearl and they look like this. And it completes the whole blackout vibe of this guitar, but what I love is when you're playing, the lacquer has actually aged a yellow color, so your side markers have actually turned yellow naturally because of that. So it's just a nice, spooky, dark guitar here. So how much is one of these things worth? It appears anywhere between $500 to $1,000. Now, some of that you're paying a premium because, you know, it's a mid-80s guitar. 80s guitars are kind of cool. And it depends on condition and originality. These are very popular to be modified. So if you can find one still in stock configuration, some other factors are, does it have the original chainsaw case or does it have any case at all? So those are some things to consider when you're pricing out your guitar. Ultimately, though, if you're looking for the best bang for your buck, these might not be it, depending on how much you're paying, because a Les Paul Studio can be had between like $600 to $900 on the used market, and that will be an infinitely more versatile guitar. You'll have 2 pickups at least, you'll have independent volume and tone controls, you'll have the maple top and a thicker body, but at the same time, you know, if you like these thin bodies that are lightweight, you don't mind that it only has 1 pickup, you know how to use it. I think these are like sleeping cult classics for the people that like these style of instruments. So while no, they might not be for everyone, I would suggest trying one out if you ever see one. I do want to go over the condition real quick because this is more of a road dog and I don't know if that really came through in this. So maybe this is kind of an anomaly, you know, it's one of the good ones get played, but you can see like some sticker shadows on this one and there's quite a few nicks and dings. So I want to make sure that the buyer knows what they're getting. Especially on the edge here, it looks like it dinged up against something. I mean, that's a major impression. So far, far, far from mint condition, and this really annoys me, this pickguard. It's just permanently bent up. There's not like a wire or cable or anything under there. It's just bent. Maybe somebody had a wire stuck out there for a long point in time and it just deformed it. But, you know, something happened to it there. It's in respectable shape now that I polished it up a little bit. But I definitely do not want any surprises on this. You got a few impressions on the neck. I did not notice them while playing, but maybe depending on your playing style, you might. But thankfully, no breaks, cracks, or repairs here. Let's go ahead and check this thing out under Blacklight. Under Blacklight, here we can see those stickers. Thankfully, it's a black guitar, so you don't really notice that until you get it in the light or the blacklight. But somebody definitely kind of punked this one up, that's for sure. That's some of the vibes I got from this thing too, like power chord, punk music. It would definitely... Whoa! I'm not quite sure what this stuff is. But it definitely did a number on this finish. Thankfully, it's black, so we can't see it. Maybe someone can identify what these were, but you cannot see that in regular lighting situations here. But no breaks, cracks, and repairs. Looking cool. Thankfully, this one actually still retains its original Gibson chainsaw case. This is, you know, towards the very, very end when they started to really strip these things down. This is what I consider a Gen 4 chainsaw case. Miraculously, this one still has the Gibson badge. But here's where I say that they cheaped out on these later made ones. There's literally no padding in these anymore. They just lined it with a felch. And they did away with the hinged door for your compartment. And they got rid of like any type of felt lining around the side. I mean, this was just a very sad way for the chainsaw case to go. But even the top only has very minimal padding. Nothing like regular Gen 3s. Troglodytes, thank you for tuning in to learn about the Gibson Melody Maker with me. I was surprised by this one. I really was not expecting too much out of it, but I've had a lot of people tell me, you should check one of these things out. And I guess, hey, maybe these are sleeping cult classics. Thank you, Troglodytes, for tuning in today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and you can check this one out on my Reverb shop. Link in the description. Take care.